how do living things actually change over generations? Not just within one life, but the whole species adapting.
Yeah, it's this fundamental question. Is it what we inherit or what we learn and acquire? That's been a huge debate.
And that's exactly where we're diving in today. We've got this fascinating piece from the past.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
It's called On Modification and Variation. The author is C. Lloyd Morgan, and it was published way back in 1896.
1896. Wow. In Science, right?
That's the one, in Science. So it gives us this incredible snapshot of how scientists were thinking about evolution, well, over a century ago, like stepping into a time machine.
Absolutely. You get a real sense of the arguments, the different camps, how they were trying to piece it all together.
Exactly. And Morgan's right in the thick of it. He's asking, how do organisms adapt? And crucially, how does that adaptation become heritable? How does it get passed down?
Because the landscape then was, well, complicated. You still had Lamarck's ideas floating around, inheritance of acquired characteristics.
Right, the giraffe's neck getting longer from stretching and passing that on.
Yeah, that classic example. But Darwin's natural selection was definitely gaining ground as the primary mechanism.
So our mission for you listening is to get inside Morgan's thinking here. Understand his perspective on this whole debate and how he tried to sort of reconcile these different evolutionary ideas, and we're aiming to keep this focused, maybe under 10 minutes.
Okay, so to really grasp Morgan's point, we should probably sketch out those main competing ideas he was dealing with.
Good idea.
First, Lamarckism, as we said. The core idea is use and disuse. Change your body during your life, pass it on.
Simple idea, appealing in a way. And Darwin, well, his main thing was natural selection, working on differences that already exist, right?
Mostly, yes. But he did dabble with explaining how acquired traits might be inherited with his pangenesis idea.
Genesis, bits of information, gemmules traveling from the body to the reproductive cells.
Something like that. It was an attempt, but it didn't really hold up scientifically, especially when he worked in the germplasm theory.
Ah, right. Galton and Weismann.
Exactly. They really pushed this idea of a strict separation between the germplasm, the sperm and egg, the hereditary stuff, and the soma, which is, well, the rest of the body.
And Weismann's argument was pretty powerful, wasn't it? That changes to the body, the soma, simply can't directly rewrite the germplasm.
Right. So if you build up muscles, that physical change doesn't just transmit to your kids through your genes. It kind of slammed the door on simple Lamarckian inheritance.
Okay. So that context is crucial for understanding Morgan.
It really is, because Morgan makes this key distinction. He talks about modifications versus variations.
Okay, let's break that down. Modifications are
changes that happen to an individual during its lifetime, caused by the environment or habits, things like that. A plant bending towards light.
Got it. Lifetime adjustments.
Yeah.
And variations.
Variations are different. They originate in the germplasm. They're the inherited differences, the stuff that natural selection actually works on.
So everyone agreed variations existed. That wasn't the argument.
No, the argument was about where they came from and whether modifications could somehow, cause similar variations to appear later.
And this is where Morgan offers his own idea, his synthesis.
Exactly. He suggests something quite subtle. He says, okay, modifications themselves aren't inherited directly. Weismann's probably right about that.
Okay.
But, he proposed, these modifications can create conditions that favor the selection of similar germinal variations if and when they happen to arise.
Say more about that. How does that work?
Think of it like this. An environmental change happens. Some individuals can adapt during their lifetime. That's modification. They survive better, reproduce more because of this flexibility.
Okay, they cope better.
Right. Now, because they're surviving or reproducing more, they create a situation, a selective pressure, where any inherited variation, any germinal variation that happens to push the organism in that same advantageous direction, well, that variation gets favored.
Ah, I think I see. The modification doesn't become the variation, but it makes the environment ready for that variation. It makes that variation more valuable when it appears.
Precisely. The modification sort of paves the way. It keeps the organism in the game, so to speak, allowing time for natural selection to pick up on any congruent inherited variations that pop up randomly.
He had an analogy, didn't he? Something about pendulums.
Yeah, the pendulum analogy. Imagine environmental changes causing a swing in a certain direction through this plastic modification. Instead of natural selection damping that swing down, it favors any congenital or inherited variations that swing the pendulum naturally in that same advantageous direction.
So selection reinforces the swing, started by modification, but does it through inherited means.
Exactly. He used the horse's foot evolution, too. The idea being maybe early horses using their middle toe more modification didn't directly pass on stronger toes.
Yep.
But individuals born with a slight genetic tendency for a larger middle toe variation would thrive in that situation where middle toe use was beneficial, so selection favored that variation.
Okay, that makes his position clear. It's an indirect link. What about Weissman's other idea, germinal selection? Did Morgan buy into that?
Weissman thought there might even be competition within the germplasm itself, among the hereditary determinants. Morgan acknowledged it was an interesting idea about where variation might come from.
But it wasn't his main focus.
No, he seemed more focused on how the external environment and the organism's response to it, even the non-heritable response, guided the selection of variations wherever they came from. He was quite optimistic about finding a middle ground.
So just to quickly summarize Morgan's key points from 1896, organisms can be modified during life. Natural selection acts on everything inherited traits, even the ability to be modified.
Right, and there's that crucial difference. Modification, somatic versus variation, germinal.
And the big idea. Persistent modification can create this selective scenario where similar inherited variations are favored over time.
That's the core of it. Individual adaptation, while not inherited itself, can steer the ship of evolution indirectly by shaping those selective pressures.
It's really quite a nuanced take for its time, trying to bridge that gap between Lamarckian sounding effects and Darwinian Weismannian mechanisms.
It really is. And it makes you think, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, thinking about what we know now about genetics, epigenetics, how environmental factors can influence gene expression, sometimes even across a generation or two.
You're wondering if there are modern echoes of Morgan's idea, that the environment, through maybe epigenetic marks or other mechanisms, could influence which genetic variations become advantageous.
Exactly. It makes you look at these historical ideas in a new light. It's definitely some interesting food for thought to take away.
It certainly is. Well, thank you for diving deep with us into C. Lloyd Morgan's 1896 perspective, a fascinating glimpse into the history of evolutionary thought.
My pleasure. It's always valuable to revisit these foundational discussions.